I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times. Welcome to the New York Times Close Up. Where do we go from here? We'll explore some possibilities with our first guest, Joseph Lhota, the chairman of the MTA. He's got a most unenviable job, but he's easily the most capable person to lead the beleaguered agency. You've just begun to read her work on the Times Op Ed page. Now you'll get to meet columnist Michelle Goldberg. She'll join us later in the program. My Times colleagues, Clyde Haberman, Eleanor Randolph, J. David Goodman, and Nikita Stewart discuss the week's latest stories and issues and look ahead on the backstory. And I'll bring some final thoughts for the week on Coda. But first, Joseph Lhota, the chairman of the MTA. Joe, you said not long ago that it was the sense of the MTA board that we need to replace the biennial fare increases with a new stream of revenue. The other day, the governor said we need new revenue. We also need to reduce traffic congestion in the city. Is there anything other than congestion pricing, and maybe we should just come up with a new name for it, that would do both those things?
Of course, there could be a dedicated tax. I'm not sure the legislature is interested in a new tax to add on. We're an extremely taxed state. What's going on in Washington now with the possibility that we wouldn't have deductibility of state and local taxes would almost make it impossible. So I think, as the governor announced today, that there's going to be a task force that he's put together of folks to report to him relatively quickly, an approach. He's including the state controller to verify the numbers that they come up with so that there's enough money generated for mass transit combined with dealing with the congestion problem we have in Midtown.
You know about transportation, you know about money. Is congestion pricing a good idea?
If properly structured, yes, congestion pricing, I think, is a good idea. I'm a big believer in supply and demand, and I think that's really at the core of it. But you have a lot of constituencies in New York, and it's going to take a tremendous amount of political skill to be able to get it done successfully.
Starting with the mayor. How do you get him on board? I know that's not your job, but someone has to.
It depends on how it's structured, whether it includes the bridges on the Manhattan Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge, those on the river, the East River that don't have a toll. There are various different ways. Technology has changed a lot since Mayor Bloomberg first proposed this. You can, now that we have all cashless on the Tri-Borough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, or what I call MTA bridges and tunnels now, you can have ways to be able to determine a car coming in and going out. So you don't have to put one on the Brooklyn Bridge. But when you come off the Brooklyn Bridge and you get onto Center Street, you would, if that was part of what's called the Central Business District, you would be charged. And what would that charge be? There have been congestion pricing proposals that have worked, some that have not worked. So I'm sure this committee and the consultants that they've hired will be able to look around the world and see how it's worked.
Emma Fitzsimmons and our other transit reporters in the Times have written that the major cause of subway delays is overcrowding. In effect, the system a victim of its own success. If that's so, then have we just reached a point where we're over capacity? And if so, what do you do about it?
So I've read what Emma's written, and she writes wonderful things. And the article she wrote about when she went to London to compare how they work there has been very, very helpful to me. I will tell you, though, congestion is one of the problems. I'm not sure it's the primary problem. There's been an enormous amount of disinvestment in maintenance within the Transit Authority, and that's what we're focused on now with the subway plan. Regarding the number of people on board, if I can get the systems up and running in a way and we can get more trains through quicker, faster, the number 7 line right now, we're going to be able to, when we open up with the communication-based controls, which will happen in the first of the year, we'll be able to get during rush hour 30 trains per hour through in every stop.
Compared to what now?
It's about 24 to 26. So you're talking a little bit over a 10% increase. But if you think about it as 30 trains per hour, that's 1 train every 2 minutes. That's the type of headway that will eliminate the number of people, the congestion. There is one thing, and I've talked to others about this, and that is it seems like New Yorkers, we all tend to come to work at the same time. There are certain times of the day when there's just a tremendous amount of activity going on.
And don't go to the middle of the cars.
Well, and you're right. Well, it depends on how you want to get out. Our new cars are going to have actually that we've ordered. They're going to have larger doors, and we're not, and the seats are not going to go right to the door. They're going to have a little bit of room so people can stand. That guy who really can't deal with anywhere but standing at the door, well, we'll create a spot for him to be in the other door. Because getting on and off is a very interesting problem that we have here in New York.
We've got something like 6 million riders a day, the highest level since the 1940s.
Right.
Did the subway system work in the 1940s? And if it did, why isn't it working now?
So, you know, obviously I wasn't born then. I don't know what happened in the late 1940s, shortly thereafter. But the subway system that I knew when I first started riding in the mid-1950s had no air conditioning, had wicker seats, had fans, had windows that opened, and I remember it being very, very hot. So, you know, I'm sure, but there's no reason to go back and compare what was to what is and what should be. I think we really need to start focusing on making it the best system in the world. It's the largest, and I think we can make it the best.
Besides overcrowding, one of the other things, as you pointed out, is problem with signal repair. I read one report that said you're trying to cut the response time from 45 minutes to 15 minutes. Why would it take 45 minutes to get a signal crew over there to fix a signal?
Because they were positioned in the wrong place. As simple as that. So we're repositioning them in areas that we think are as close to where there could be problem areas. Instead of being at the end of the line in the Bronx or at the end of the line in Brooklyn or in Queens, have them spread all throughout the city. I mean, it's a common sense approach on how to do it. That's why, you know, we can get it down to a shorter period of time.
That's why it hadn't been done before. 32 million or so, the capital plan for the MTA. Is that enough? Do we know realistically, if you were in charge of the world, how much should we really be spending? And how much of that is already funded?
It's theoretically all funded right now. And is it enough? It's enough for the remaining 3 years of the plan. We're going to need another 5-year plan shortly. And we're starting to work on that. We're going to need new cars. We're going to need new rail. And look, we've started to begin the process of renovating stations. We opened up the very first new enhanced station out in Brooklyn on the R line. I encourage you to go out there. You won't believe you're on the subway system. You can charge your phone. Everything is digital. Everything is clean. In fact, on the street level, you'll actually see the countdown clock on the street level, so you don't have to go down as well to see it. We need to do that in all of our subway stops in the city. We need to make them look better.
If you were in charge of the world and could get one wish for the MTA, what would it be?
That I'd move to Malibu and live on the ocean? No. If I had one wish is that we didn't have to worry about the cost of running the system. I mean, because that burden of wondering where the operating dollar is going to come from, where the capital dollar is going to come from. That's the one wish I have, that you didn't have that finance burden on us.
Maybe the governor could fix that. Thanks to Joe Lhota for joining us. And when we return, the new Op Ed columnist of the New York Times, Michelle Goldberg. Welcome back to the New York Times Close-Up. Joining me now, new op-ed page columnist of the New York Times, Michelle Goldberg. She's written a number of books, including the bestseller Kingdom Coming, The Rise of Christian Nationalism, The Goddess Pose, The Means of Reproduction, and now writing columns twice a week for the New York Times. You wrote not long ago that we have an unhinged lunatic who lost the popular vote and was installed with the aid of a hostile foreign power. And it calls everything we thought we knew about this country's stability into question. But more recently, you said the country has held up pretty well considering. So what does that say about the man and the institutions and the resiliency of the country?
Well, the second part of that was considering until Puerto Rico, right? I mean, that column was basically about how, although, you know, our diplomacy has gone to hell, the State Department's been hollowed out, a lot of the institutions of our democracy seem to be under attack, political norms are falling right and left. You know, materially, it's after Donald Trump was inaugurated, it almost seems strange to me that you could still walk down the street or take money out of the bank, that there wasn't like trash fires everywhere, you know, how housing prices didn't collapse. I mean, it just seemed like such a calamitous event. And in fact, the economy's hummed along pretty well. I think in Puerto Rico, we're starting to really see the material consequences of having a president who has no business being there.
Is he doing anything right?
If he is, I can't think of anything.
Really?
I mean, can you?
Well, there are a couple of things he says he's doing right. That's certainly true. You say we have entered a period of minority rule. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's not. So obviously the Constitution was never created as America was never supposed to be a direct democracy. And there's a lot of good reasons that you want protections for minorities in a liberal democratic system. But we've now entered this period where the majority that hates Donald Trump and what he's doing to this country cannot exercise power at any level of the federal government, right? So you have a minority president. And it's worth remembering that when that happened in 2000 with George W. Bush, that was considered like a shocking anomaly. It hadn't happened in over 100 years. People treated it as a fluke. If you look at some of the commentary there, they would say, well, if this happens again, then there's going to be a real legitimacy question. So it did happen again, and I think it's not a coincidence that at both times it's worked to the Republicans' benefit because of this built-in advantage that small states have in the Electoral College, which is only getting more pronounced as the discrepancy between the biggest states, the population discrepancy between the biggest states and the smallest states grow. So now you have not just this minority president, but if you look at the fact that most of the polls show that majorities are going to vote against the Republican Party in the midterms, and most analysts say that it's very unlikely to be enough to flip either house.
Although that's a year away.
Right, but the analysis that I've seen says that basically Democrats would need to get about 10% more total votes than Republicans to win the House. And so, there's so many people find this administration so intolerable, and they're just structurally locked out of doing anything about it.
Intolerable, a great word. Do we tolerate anything anymore? Do people realize that freedom of speech also implies the obligation, or certainly at least the freedom, to listen?
So I have a column that I'm working on right now, and there's been times when I've thought that this idea that there's a war on free speech on college campuses has been overblown, although there was some kind of disturbing footage out of a college this week where activists shouted down a talk on free speech by the head of the Virginia ACLU. And the point that I want to make is that in some ways I kind of understand why these kids roll their eyes when they hear free speech, because they've grown up at a time when free speech is the slogan of kind of right-wing provocateurs who see it as an analogy to say sort of really racist things without consequences. But it's obviously so much more than that. And what I think gets lost in this is that although you have this very fevered atmosphere on college campuses with a lot of kind of left-wing censoriousness, if you look nationally, there is such a profound war on free speech being waged from the right, whether you're talking about Donald Trump calling for people to get fired for kneeling on a football field, or states that are passing laws to harass protesters. Several legislatures have proposed laws, not passed them, that basically would indemnify cars that hit protesters who are blocking roadways, right? So you have this war on protest. This is the worst possible time.
But at the same time, we are seeing a lot of attacks on free speech by the left.
Yeah, I think that that's true. Well, I guess I would say define a lot, but yeah, I think that that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily equating, but
right.
Certainly there are people on the left who are saying we shouldn't be allowed to listen to certain speakers.
Yes, I think, well, or not that we shouldn't be allowed to listen, but yeah, that certain speakers shouldn't be
invited to.
And to me, here's the thing that's really difficult, is that I feel like everybody believes that there are certain ideas that are beyond the pale, right? I mean, and the problem is that we've lost any sense of consensus about what those are. So everybody's struggling over what those lines should be. And I sort of see it as being in the nature of college students to push those boundaries. I think it's up to the responsible left to push back.
There ought to be some grown-up somewhere. Let me ask you a terribly leading question. You had a wonderful conversation at nytimes.com with Gail Collins about what it's like and what it means to be an op-ed columnist. Do people ever say to you, what entitles you to give your opinion in the New York Times?
I imagine people think it. I certainly think it all the time. I mean, I'm still gobsmacked to have been given this opportunity, and I honestly can't give you an answer.
Well, someone must have thought you were good enough. Is there a difference in writing for print and writing for the web, writing for nytimes.com?
I don't think there's a difference so far that I've seen in writing for nytimes.com, except that you're not bound, obviously, by the same space constraints. there's a difference in writing for the web, for example, at Slate, where I used to work, just in that the whole process is so much faster, which the New York Times, for obvious reasons, can't be, because they have to be a lot more careful and deliberate. And it seems like people are still trying to strike that balance between incredible timeliness and the care that everything that goes in the New York Times deserves.
Right, we're trying to do that every day. Thanks to Michelle Goldberg for joining us. You can read her column in print and online, Tuesdays and Fridays. And when we return, the backstory with my Times colleagues. Welcome back to the New York Times Close Up. What kind of week has it been? Horrific in Las Vegas, the scene of unspeakable carnage. Puerto Rico continued to struggle to regain some semblance of normalcy. Many of the city's residents still trying to communicate with their families. And with a month before the election, the race for city council speaker may be the one to watch. Joining me to discuss these stories and more, my New York Times colleagues, contributing writer Clyde Haberman and Eleanor Randolph, City Hall Bureau reporter J. David Goodman, and Metro reporter Nikita Stewart. David, you wrote the other day that the mayor is continuing to rehab housing units, so-called affordable units, affordable obviously being a relative term. And Nikita, you keep writing about the fact that homelessness, if not getting worse, certainly doesn't seem to be getting better. How do we reconcile these two things?
Oh, that's a tough question.
Well, I know. I was hoping you guys would solve it.
Well,
and are the numbers of housing that are being created or rehabilitated or whatever real?
Yes. I mean, they're real. It's a question of what you want out of the mayor's plan. And so the critics that will attack his plan will say that these are not targeted at the right populations to help with the homeless issue. So that if you're building a certain number of, there's a large number of units that, so they build about 77, or excuse me, they financed about 77,000 units to date. They've built a much smaller number of them. But even within that number, at the lowest level, it's only a fraction of that total plan. And so that was always the approach. They were going to build a certain number of, sort of middle, what they're calling middle income units to subsidize essentially the lower income units that are already sort of being cross-subsidized from market rate units. And they argue that they want to do that because they want to keep the city, a place that people can live at all income levels. But, the problem is that there's a huge amount of demand at the lowest end. And in that middle band, there's actually a lot of market rate options for people. And so you actually, when you kind of crunch the numbers and you look into it, fewer people are applying for the middle income units and as are apply in the lotteries for the lower income units. And so the people that say they should do more at that level might have a point.
Nikita, meanwhile, we're putting people in hotels where the mayor is promising to open 90 new shelters, but we don't know where. So where are we on this problem?
Well, if you go back to what David was talking about with the housing that the mayor is creating and protecting, when you look at who is homeless in the city, we have mostly families with children. Families with children need larger apartments. Larger apartments cost more money. And so that's where you're seeing a disconnect in kind of the mayor's plan and, who actually needs to benefit. And then, so as a stopgap, the city, even before Mayor de Blasio came into office, they had different approaches. They created these so-called cluster apartments, which were private apartments in private buildings being used as shelter. But it's not ideal. People don't necessarily get the services they need. They don't have as much communication with social workers that they need who could possibly help them get apartments. And then you have hotels. And now that the mayor is closing a lot of the cluster apartments, they're putting more people in hotels, even though the mayor has promised that, the city won't use hotels in 5 years. So if you look at it, I don't think, I can't see how they reach it in 5 years.
5 years ahead when you won't be there anymore.
That's right.
Right.
Speaking of which, we have the first general election mayoral debate coming up this next week. If you were on a panel of interviewers, what would you want to ask the mayor?
Well, I mean, is he going to travel a lot when he's reelected?
Not on the subway, you mean out of town?
Well, is he going to travel on the subway? But I mean really out of town. Is he going to be here and be our mayor?
And he does see himself as a major figure in progressive America. So I don't think he's making any apologies for wanting to be on the road a lot. And that is one question. And an inevitable question would be, what would his principal agenda be for the second term? But there's also a part of me that wonders if that's not some sort of journalism affect, you know, as if somebody has to have some grand plan for the first term and something completely different or you know, noticeable for the second term, as if continuing lower crime and picking up the garbage and so on is not their own reward.
Is it a journalistic affect to even have a debate in this election?
Arguably, especially this one, but it is still a good thing to have. Nicole Maliotakis, the Republican candidate, is a very conservative assemblywoman from Staten Island. She differs with the mayor on many things, and she deserves to be heard. Bo Dietl is sort of going to be the Trump of the debate, you know, the insult guy, and I think we've all had enough of that. But with Ms. Maliotakis and the mayor, you have different views of government's role and so on, whether her facts are completely right on. I mean, she keeps on talking about crime as if, you know, it's out of control, when the opposite is so. But in terms of philosophy, they're quite different.
Well, you know what? Any debate is, especially for you, de Blasio really needed debates. He needed more competition. The one thing
He did, or the city did?
Well, both.
No, de Blasio. I mean, really, he's gonna win this in a walk, and she's the only one who's really questioning him in an appropriate way, you know, for the politics of the right, and he's definitely the politics of the left. And people, I don't know whether people are going to watch this, but it's really important that he be challenged.
And be held accountable. Yeah. David, you said the big race, if there is anything competitive, is the race for the council speakership. Right. Given the people who are running or likely to run, will it make any difference politically in the life of the city?
That's an interesting question. I mean, certainly at this point, they're not arguing on the basis of policy at all. They're arguing it's all about, you know, winning over 50 of your fellow members in the city council. So it's not voters that vote, and that's about relationships. It's about, you know, what are you going to do for me, you know, down the road. It's politics outside. One person said to me, you know, it's not like, people talk about it being kind of like a high school prom. It's not like that. It's like the high school prom if like every other person in your town was also trying to influence who was going to win the high school prom. So, you know, it's not really about, at the end of the day, what the politics will be. These are all people that are on a spectrum of progressive, essentially. And it's more about how you kind of carry yourself, what kind of leader you'll be. And so there's some people that feel, you know, that some of the candidates wouldn't be as effective or as strong in standing up to the mayor, might be too close to him. There's really an appetite for having an independent council. That's what everyone will tell you. Whether they really want it to be that antagonistic, I don't know. But there's a spectrum of candidates out there who would be closer or further away from the mayor, and that's kind of going to be the big question.
Columbus Day coming up. The mayor is not saying what he would do with the statue in Columbus Circle. Do we have any hint as to where that panel he created is going to go?
No, he gave them 90 days, mirabile dictu, well past the election, so he can avoid that and still feel he gets some credit for having, you know, stood up for whatever. I don't quite understand any of this, and it opens up the inevitable can of worms. You know, many of our historical figures in this city were flawed people, to say the least. Whether it was Peter Stuyvesant, who you know, exiled Jews and other religious minorities, even Fiorello LaGuardia, by the way, had put Japanese Americans under house arrest.
Right. Thanks to my Times colleagues, Clyde Haberman, Eleanor Randolph, J. David Goodman, and Nikita Stewart for joining us. I'll be back with some final thoughts when we return. On January 23, 1911, Fitzhugh Goldsborough, a 31-year-old violinist, brazenly fired 7 shots from his automatic revolver near Gramercy Park. The first 6 fatally wounded the novelist David Graham Phillips. Then Goldsborough put the gun to his temple and fired once. The double shooting was the lead article in the next day's New York Times. George LeBrun, an assistant to the city's chief medical examiner, concluded that murder had become a public health problem. I reasoned that the time had come to have legislation passed that would prevent the sale of pistols to irresponsible persons. In the vernacular of the day, LeBrun wrote, there ought to be a law. The murder-suicide inspired State Senator Timothy Sullivan from the Lower East Side to demand just such a law, a ban on concealed weapons. The gun-toter, the tough man, Sullivan said, I don't want his vote. Big Tim's motives were suspect. Was the Tammany boss merely seeking to keep more guns from his gangster allies? He was also a quintessential party hack. Back then, though, that meant he understood good government was good politics. Upstate legislators questioned the ban's impact. You can't force a burglar to get a license to use a gun, an upstate senator carped. He'll get one from another state. Sullivan invoked the Bible. It seems to me, he said, that this bill will help along obedience to the commandment, thou shalt not kill. Today, the Sullivan Law is still on the books. But even a century ago, George LeBrun had warned that the ban would only be fully effective if it were adopted nationwide. It's like corruption in Albany. The problem isn't so much what's already illegal these days, when more New Yorkers are likely to shoot themselves than get shot. The problem is the existing regulations that make gun and ammunition purchases legal. Instead of closing loopholes, Congress is considering legislation that would let someone with a concealed carry permit from a state with looser regulations, Nevada, say, to legally carry his gun in states with stronger regulations, like New York. So much for states' rights, and for what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. LeBrun and his critics were both right. Today, more than 8 in 10 of every traced gun used to commit a crime comes to New York from another state. The Sullivan Law was not the author David Graham Phillips' only legacy. His investigative reporting so angered Teddy Roosevelt that the president denounced Phillips and his fellow journalistic agitators as, quote, muckrakers. Phillips' articles that vexed Roosevelt most appeared under a headline that is no less apt when Congress is beholden to the gun lobby. The series was called The Treason of the Senate. It began this way. Treason is a strong word, but not too strong to characterize the situation in which the Senate is the eager, resourceful, and indefatigable agent of interests as hostile to the American people as any invading army could be. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.